And action. Well, welcome to another Afterthoughts with Kaylee and Lee. Is it Lee or Kaylee and Lee on the slide? I think it's Kaylee and Lee.
Oh,
I think you're first.
Oh, I thought it was Lee and Kaylee. Maybe alphabetical? Kaylee, Lee?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Either way.
But can we talk about how when someone says, "Oh, Kaylee"?
Yes. On staff here, there is an ongoing issue that obviously we need to confess to the church.
Oh,
is that
sounds intense.
Kaylee and Hey Lee
Kaylee. Like,
sound
Kaylee.
very, very similar. And so we are constantly answering to the wrong people because they're trying to get a hold of Kaylee. And I'm saying, yeah, what do you want out of my office? Or they're talking to me and Kaylee's like, oh, did you call me? So I think we can work it out. You guys might notice that we've got some fancy new mics.
Yeah.
So thanks, Aiden, for doing some research and figuring out what we need to get really, really clear sound. So we're Advent of Love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have your shirt?
I have my shirt. Yep. So this one is Love Came Down. It's hard to see the love on this one. So this isn't my favorite one, but other people, like even Corinne said this is her favorite one. But I think it's because it's the major and the star and all of that.
Yeah. Good colors.
Next year I have to get new shirts. People are noticing the shirts. I wore them last year, but everyone has forgotten. So I think I got my 2 years out of them, and now I got to get new Advent shirts.
All right. Shall we jump in?
Yeah.
Oh, why don't you recap for us then?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, love is an interesting one, and for me and our church, because love is something that we've talked about a lot in the last. Well, I've been in this role now for 3.5 years, which seems that's surprising to me. Like that the numbers are climbing quickly. It seems like I just started, but it's actually been a minute. But this is, I think, love is, and maybe rightly so, been the thing we've talked about the most. So I talked again about the definitions of love, the Greek words for love that we read in the New Testament. It's one of those English words that has so many meanings that in the New Testament, Greek, being a lot more precise, uses different words for those different meanings. And I think anytime we talk about love, we have to be reminded of those because it's very easy when we initially start talking about love to jump into what's our favorite meaning or where are we at currently with how we're understanding about what love is. So really just talked about like what is agape love? Like really what is when they say the love of Christ or the God so loved the world that he sent his son. And I mean, that's the love that we are celebrating here in Advent is agape love, like ultimately. Yeah. So really just breaking down what is that? And that whole agape like word, like that's new to the New Testament. Like it's almost a little bit like the writers created a word or at least a meaning because of what Christ did, Father sending the Son. So cool. I think it's pretty significant for us as followers of Jesus. And if we are to love as Christ's love, if we are to be in the Father's love, if we are to, love God with all of our heart and to love our neighbor as ourselves, we really need to quite understand what that is. So that's what Sunday was about.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love it. You talked about chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians kind of before you went into chapter 13 too, kind of giving the precursor and talking about legalism a little bit, touching on that. I was listening this week. I can't remember to what, but I wrote it down. And the person who I was listening to said holiness cannot be legislated.
Oh, yeah.
And
I like that.
Yeah. And they talked about how holiness comes from an intimate relationship with someone who's holy. And it's interesting because, even though the Pharisees were, legalistic in their operating, you could argue still at the core of what they were aiming for was holiness, right?
Agreed.
But that can't be legislated.
Yeah.
So it's this interesting kind of like, what do you do with the do's and don'ts, and how do you hold them in tension? I'm going to jump right into it and ask a question Where could you today free yourself from the do's and don'ts? Actually, maybe even not free yourself, but let the Lord free you from the do's and don'ts of a legislated holiness.
Good question too. Legalism ultimately, like I said, is void of relationship. Like it takes God out of like the relationship you have with God. It takes it out because it's now just about doing the actions. Like you could be legalistic, do all of the right things, and not have a relationship with God, which is ultimately where the legalism comes from. It's like I am following a list of rules, and it actually doesn't matter why. So it is the why and it is the who that matters, right, in our relationships. I mean, ultimately, I even think of the analogy of is I have responsibilities at home of doing the dishes and, making meals on certain nights. But I do it out of a love of my family, wanting to care for them. And so it's not a chore, right? Like it's not a checkbox. If I did it, I can now.
I have loved you.
I have loved you, check, right? Like it really flows out of like, where's my heart at? And I could still make meals and do dishes and be completely void of relationship, but it means so much less. Like there's nothing redemptive in it. The action is actually not redeemable in some ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians I found fascinating because you look at chapter 11 and then chapter 12 and chapter 13 and the sequence of that. I found myself wanting to go back and back and back for more context and forward and forward and forward for more like breadth of it.
That's right.
And so chapter 11, the Lord's Supper and this, communion with God, worship description. Chapter 12, spiritual gifts and the working it out of the body or of the church. And then chapter 13, and now love. I kind of like, I want to ask you this.
Sure.
So I'm sorry if it's too, I don't know how to, without like maybe giving you warning. But the question I would also ask to people, and this would be a time to like open your Bible to 1 Corinthians 11 to 13 and like start looking for it. Have you ever considered why these chapters are connected? And even though technically the topics are all different, where do you see threads where they're cohesive?
This is what bothered me about 1 Corinthians 13 being a wedding chapter.
Oh, totally.
Because it actually has nothing to do with marriage.
Yeah.
And it has everything to do with our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. Like it really is explaining and fleshing out loving God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. But within the context of loving each other as disciples. Like they will know that you are my disciples by how you love one another.
Yeah.
And this is actually fleshing that thought out. Like we sometimes forget that the letters to the churches are really just the apostles' commentaries on the very things that Jesus taught.
Yeah.
And when you start reading those letters in that way, they open up significantly. We all talk about it, and I've heard our congregation say this lots. So they love it when they see the connections from Old Testament to New Testament, or seeing books get tied in with each other.
Yeah.
But like that is one of those basic tie-ins of the Gospels are this story and the teachings of Jesus, and the rest of the New Testament, even in its history and in its prophecy, are all just commentaries on what Jesus already taught us. Right? Like there's nothing kind of new. It's just unpacking it a little bit more as the Spirit kind of goes, these are things that the church is going to have to work out, or people are going to have to work out in their own hearts. So yeah, they're all tied together. So that's a good observation. I like that.
You also mentioned how God's love is fully expressed in Jesus, right? We're in this season, and that's why we talk about love at Advent. I honestly want to now simplify the questions.
Because it's simple Christmas.
Yeah, right. And I think it would be cool in your group or as a family to share a time in your life when you felt God's love expressed to you in your own life. Do you have one? Putting you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And just so that everybody is aware, we don't talk about this before. I asked Kaylee to kind of work on some stuff, and I said, you guys surprise me with it, because then I feel like it's more authentic answers and more engagement. So
And I stumble more, so it's funnier.
yeah, and that's great.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Seeing God's love expressed in my own life. I honestly, the one of the biggest ones is how, and I'm in a unique position as a pastor, and I recognize that the office of the pastor, you sometimes you receive the harder things, but you receive some of the really good things that maybe others don't quite see all the time. So the encouragement that I get from the church family, still to this day shocks me at times, and how the timing comes. So when I need it the most, or if I'm in a tough spot, or I'm feeling a little vulnerable, or feeling a little insecure, how regular the Spirit moves to the people in our congregation and in churches I've worked at before this, to give encouragement and support in the most opportune time. And so the love that I feel from the church, really, because it's so almost supernatural in its timing at times, where I go, the love of God pours through the church to me. And again, I think I'm uniquely situated in that, I'm always up front, and people are always feeling like they need to encourage their pastor, because it's not the easiest thing. And but it is shocking to me, the timing that those things come in on, to the point now where I just know that that's from God. It's not just from the church.
Yeah.
But people are just like, oh, I'd just send you a quick note, and they have no idea how big a deal that is. So for me, that's probably the big one that stands out.
Cool.
For me anyway. Yeah.
That's cool. Even as you shared it, my brain's going like, oh my goodness, that's love embodied. So that's Jesus. That's like the point of Jesus being a human, was so that we can embody his Spirit, so that then he could reside in us and meet us, and we can meet one another by his Spirit.
Yep.
Cool.
It's very nice.
That's all I got.
Awesome. We end poor.
So bored.